Welcome to this video on hydration strategies. In a previous video we discussed the negative impacts of dehydration on the body, but in this video we'll discuss some strategies that can be used to help you or an athlete that you're working with to maintain a state of adequate hydration. So let's take a look. In a moment, we'll try and answer the question of whether an athlete should drink according to their thirst or whether a planned strategy is required. Before that, I want to point out a few things to bear in mind. First, it's important to note that if you are off to run or compete in a very hot environment that you're not used to, even having a good hydration strategy is not sufficient to ensure that you avoid dehydration. According to Fortney and Roman 1985, only acclimatization programs are effective in preventing heat stress during prolonged exercise in hot environments. Training camps, for example, can be an important part of this acclimatization. Hydration strategies cannot replace acclimatization. Second, although it is a very important indicator, there are some situations in which thirst might not be a totally reliable indicator of your hydration status. And to be clear, before we get into this in more depth, thirst is probably the best indicator of hydration status for healthy people when not exercising. But for those who are ill or very elderly, thirst becomes a less reliable indicator even when not exercising. Third, don't think that you can save yourself the effort of thinking this through and just drink as much water as possible. Over drinking water during exercise can also cause negative physiological effects. For example, if the electrolytes lost from sweating aren't replaced in the correct proportions, that can lead to something called hyponatremia, where plasma sodium levels drop drastically. But that's a subject for another video. With all that said, let's now answer the question. Should I drink to thirst or drink to a planned strategy? And this is a subject that divides opinion, and there are researchers who fall on either side of the debate. Perrier et al. From 2020 suggests that for low to moderate intensity activity of durations less than 50 minutes and in cool to warm climates, it's a perfectly legitimate strategy to drink to thirst. That is, if you feel like you need a drink, you should have a drink. If you're not thirsty, there's no need to preemptively drink. So far, so simple. However, the same authors say that for moderate to high intensity activities, with durations over 60 minutes and in warm to hot climates, thirst may not be a completely reliable guide to hydration status. And so they suggest in this case that there should be a planned hydration strategy developed and in place prior to exercise or competition. So what might that strategy involve? How do we go about devising a hydration strategy? There are some generic things that most athletes could do as part of a hydration strategy, and these are taken from the ACSM guidelines from 2011. First, you might want to ensure that your pre-exercise hydration levels are adequate, which is known as being in a state of euhydration. To do this, it can be wise to take on a little extra fluid along with a small meal that will assist in the absorption of that fluid. According to the ACSM guide from 2019, endurance athletes should consume 16 ounces of a high sodium beverage 45 to 90 minutes before an event. Secondly, increasing palatability is a useful idea. Palatability just means how it tastes, which influences how likely you are to actually want to drink that fluid. If it doesn't taste nice, you're unlikely to consume it. So palatability can be increased with your favorite flavoring. For me, I'm happy with plain old water because I like the taste, but not everyone does. You can also add salt or sugar, and lots of off-the-shelf drinks have these already mixed in. Sports drinks with additional carbohydrate are especially helpful for longer events lasting over an hour. This sugar and the other electrolytes in sports drinks also assist with absorption in the gut and therefore in rehydration. Drinks that are cooler than room temperature, so somewhere between 15 and 21 degrees Celsius, are also preferable for most people. There's not much worse, is there, than when you're training or playing on a hot day and having to drink water that's been heating up in the sun. So those are some generic strategies that will be applicable across the board, but there are also some aspects of a hydration strategy that can be personalized. And the extent of your commitment to your training and your sport will determine how far down this road that you go. The key point here is that everyone has a different sweat rate, so it may be helpful to gather some data on this that will give you a fighting chance of effectively managing your hydration status during your competition. This is taken from Kokoran and Ayotte 2019 from the ACSM guidelines again. So first, you would need to calculate your sweat rate. And this can be done by measuring body weight before and after exercise, since the difference in weight is likely to be solely due to water loss. This will give an indication of whether you need to increase your water intake during exercise to replace the sweat that was lost. Another thing you might want to do is to discover your sweat composition, including the proportion of sodium being lost in your sweat and the rate at which it's being lost. This will help you figure out how much salt you should include in the fluid replacement drinks that you take on during and after exercise. You'll probably need to do a little bit of trial and error during your training to find the right balance for your personalized strategy. And so this is of course going to require you to practice the strategy in training and perhaps in some of your less critical competitions. So you go back to the drawing board until you get a strategy that works for you. You're going to want to vary the volume of fluid you take on, the timings of its consumption, and the composition and palatability of those fluids. Not everyone can take on a large amount of fluid whilst they exercise. It can cause bloating in the gut and so on. So these strategies need to be trialed in advance of competition. So there are some useful generic strategies and some useful personalized strategies. And I hope that's been helpful for you. I'll see you in the next video.